Of course, they're there in the desert and they're dying of thirst. And the first thing, of course, they do is blame Moses for dragging them out into the desert to die. It was a frequent occurrence that they would complain that God, had deceived them somehow to drag them out into the desert to kill them off. That maybe they shouldn't have listened. It would have been much more fun to stay back in Egypt and have enough food to eat and water to drink. And even if they were slaves, it was better than that experience. So, is God in our midst or not? How many times do we ask that question ourselves when we go through a period of great trial, or someone we love is seriously ill, or we suffer some kind of great setback, or we just look at the state of the world and the kinds of things that are happening, whether they're natural disasters or political disasters of one form or another. And sometimes we're led to ask the question, especially the people who've gone through so much, in the Caribbean in particular, is God in our midst or not? The answer to the question is going to depend on your faith. If you really don't believe in God to start with, someone telling you about it is going to be confronted by the realities around you. So if this God that you say exists, that you say all of these wonderful things about, if he's really in the midst of his people, why have they gone through such tremendous suffering? Why is there so much hatred? Why is there so much violence? If this God that you say you believe in and that you want us to believe in is a God of peace, or a God of justice, or a God who loves the poor, or a God who cares so much for his people that he give them water from a rock in the desert and send manna and quail from heaven to feed them as they were going through the desert, and all the other things that this God you say in the Bible has done. Well, what about in the here and now? And even his own people complain. And I think that complaint is important for us to hear, especially when we reflect on the situations of the present time. The difficulty always is there's no simple answer of why doesn't God do this when we ask for it. Why is it that when we ask for peace that there is more injustice, or there's a growing sense of insecurity or hatred or violence? When we ask for mercy, that it seems that we don't hear anything, or we ask for sufficient food for people in the world, and that there are so many people who are famished right now. Famines going on in various places, severe droughts that have led to these famines. And all kinds of these things, and we ask. And so our understanding of God, as we have come to know him in Jesus, stands in such opposition to all of these things that are going on. It's no wonder that some people will say, this is just a big fairy tale. Why believe any of this stuff? And so we can't say exactly why God doesn't act in the way that we human beings think he ought to act in a particular situation. Because in the book of Job, for example, the question comes up, and for 37 chapters, there's all kinds of speculation about why bad things happen to good people. Why do people who are innocent suffer? Why do people who have so much against them to start with seem to have more stuff piled up against them? Why is this? And, they're trying, Job's friends in that book tried to explain to him that it's because he sinned that all these terrible things had happened to him, so he ought to just admit it and then get on with it. But he continues to protest his innocence. And then around chapter 38, to at least the next 3 or 4 chapters, God speaks. And what God is saying is not an answer to what Job asks. He doesn't give a direct answer. What God says is, there are going to be things that you cannot understand. To be crass about it, that are above your pay grade. You don't have the right to know. Because you can't know. You can't grasp. You can't understand. What you are called to is believe and to trust. And that's where I think the tie-in today comes with the gospel. That when Jesus is there and he does this, first of all, earlier in the chapter, Jesus has cleansed the temple. He's chased out the money changers and the animal sellers out of the temple, which immediately, of course, put him in the sights of the authorities, because he's upset everything. And then, a little bit later on, when he comes to the temple, they confront him and saying, by what authority did you do this? And also, who gave you this authority? And so he just confounds them by saying, now, okay, I'll answer your question if you answer mine, playing the role of the rabbi, which is how they did things. And so they can't answer the question in a way that's not going to somehow get them into trouble with the people or being confronted by Jesus, and so they weasel their way out. And so Jesus doesn't say anything, but he tells them that little story about which of the sons did the Father's will. And they understand, ultimately, that he's talking about them. Who is it that does the Father's will? The one who says no and then goes and does it, or the one who says yes and doesn't do anything? And so they answer, and so he says, all of the bad people, in quotes, that you condemn, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, these people who you look down upon are the ones who at one point in their life say no, but then they hear the word and they respond. They can't fully understand what it all is going to mean, but it has something in that word, that invitation to conversion, to following the law of God, to entering into the life of God, and to trust those words that are spoken and the life that results from it, that brings them in. Whereas you, who should know better, you who know the Scriptures, you who know supposedly the mind of God, you are the ones that say yes, and then you don't do anything. You do nothing. You don't really respond. It goes in one ear and out the other. You don't listen. And so they do not understand that God is in their midst, but it requires their response to experiencing. They thought they knew it. They thought they were in contact with God because they were following the law. They were following all 613 precepts of the law. They thought that everything was the way God had meant it to be. And when they're confronted by a different way of looking at it, an invitation to come to the Lord at a different level, at the level of the heart, and to see that these other people have been welcomed into the life of God. While they're standing there and judging everybody, they decide that that's where they really want to be. They're saying God is in our midst, but they're not mirroring him. They're not revealing him. All they're trying to do is to say, God will take care of you, will keep you if you keep the law. And so, what the people during the Exodus fought against so often was the fact that God really was in their midst. It was easier for them to complain and to question rather than to obey, rather than to trust, rather than to believe. It was easier to say, we should have stayed in Egypt. It was so much better back then. We had food, we had water, we had a life. We at least knew what was expected of us. Is God in our midst or not? God was there, leading them the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire at night, giving them the manna, giving them water, giving them quail, giving them protection, showing them the way, forgiving them time and time and time again. But when they want something, when they wanted it and they wanted it now, then they questioned, then they doubted. And they had to be called back again. The people in the gospel, when they would listen to what Jesus said, when they would attend to what he was teaching, when they would listen with their hearts and not just their ears, then they could experience God in their midst in a whole new way, rather than the way that they had in the past, or those who felt that they were totally unworthy of this love of God, or of God in any way, because of being tax collectors, because of being prostitutes, because of being everyday people who couldn't measure up to following the law so totally, who couldn't always observe everything because it was impossible to carry out their work. But yet Jesus says, but the love of God and the mercy of God and the compassion of God and the kindness of God is for you, and for you, and for you, and for you, and even for the Pharisees and the scribes and the religious leaders. But what it took was making that next step, not just hearing it, but saying, I believe, I trust, I will go when I don't understand, when I don't see God operating in my life. I'm still going to believe that he's there, that he loves me, that he's caring for me, that even though I can't recognize it, or I can't feel it, or I can't see it, that he's there. All those people who are suffering right now in the aftermath of the hurricanes and the earthquakes could all say, this God stuff is all a lot of bunk. But hopefully enough of them understand that even in the midst of what they've endured, that the Lord was with them. God isn't in the business of controlling everything in the universe in the way that we would control things if we could. But he was there. There was one thing that stood out in many of the things I read in preparation for today that comes out of the concentration camps. And I think it's a recollection of Elie Wiesel, who says that, there was that complaint, is God in our midst or not? Does God really care about it? Is there even a God who would allow such a terrible thing to happen? And there are those who concluded that, no, there is no God. If there is a God, he doesn't care about this people because he's abandoned us. And here we are. But what Elie Wiesel points out is that there were others who said, yes, even in this hell, even in this horrible place, this place of death, God is here. That's God over there going into the oven. That's God who went into the gas chamber. That's God who's hanging out there on those gallows. That's God with us, suffering with us, going through it with us. The God that we know from our faith. The God who doesn't snap to and give us exactly what we want, when we want it, how we want it, but who calls us to trust in Him and to believe in Him and to love Him and know that He loves us, even if we suffer, even if we die, even if we go through things that we think that, no one should ever endure. That this God is with us, even though we don't always understand how or why He does what He does. And so for you and me, as we look at our own lives and our own struggles and our own doubts and our own fears, we can ask, is God in our midst or not? But Jesus today reminds us that it's our response to His call that will bring us to a deeper sense of His love and peace. Whatever He's calling us to let go of, to repent of, whatever He's calling us to do, rather than questioning or wondering or being afraid or being upset or angry because of things that have happened or that haven't happened, that we trust and say yes, even though it's hard, even though we may at the first refuse, that we go and believe, we go and trust, we go and do as we are called to do. And then we'll experience God in our midst, in our problems, in our sufferings, as well as in our joys. And that's who invites us today, once again, to His table. As we are with all that we bring, to be filled again with His love and His life and His mercy, and with that sense that, yes, God is in our midst. Not to be the magician who snaps to and gives us everything we want when we want it, but the one who loves us faithfully and who gives us what we truly need for our lives and forever.